How ending mining would change the world. Most countries mine something. China, Australia and the US are the global leaders for production value of raw materials, but extraction makes up a far larger share of the economy for some other nations. In at least 18 countries, metallic minerals and coal account for more than half of all exports. For some of these, it's more than 80%. In a no mining of metals scenario, the entire economies of countries such as Suriname with its industrial gold mining, the Democratic Republic of Congo, where cobalt is king, and Mongolia, a leading exporter of copper, would be at risk. Simon Jowett, an economic geologist at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, does not mince words on what he thinks the end of metals mining would look like. It would be the end of society as we recognize it today, he says, noting that we mine more now than we ever have before. A good example of our increasing reliance on a wide array of metals is the average mobile phone, says Jowett. In the 1980s, a mobile needed 20 or so different elements. A new smartphone today needs more than twice that. Modern life is simply minerals and metals intensive. We wouldn't be having this conversation without them, he quips via video call from his home in Nevada. Around 3 months after the end of mining, stockpiles of rare earth metals and other metals useful to technology would be finished, leading to worrying trends for the pharmaceutical, car, electronics and construction industries. This would lead to massive unemployment that on a never-before-seen scale, says Thompson. Pressure would soon increase to redirect all metals recycling into renewables. Just in time for the collapse of supply chains, oil reserves would finally run out. The U.S.'s Strategic Petroleum Reserve, the largest fallback oil stockpile in the world, contains 730 million barrels of oil stored in salt caverns across the country, enough for 3 months at most. The production of petrol, diesel, plastics and road asphalt would come to end. And with them, the fossil fuel age. After a handful of months, global food supplies would be in crisis. An estimated 50% of food production depends on synthetic fertilizers, which are made up of varying formulas of phosphorus, potassium and natural gas. Lower crop yields could lead to food shortages, particularly in countries where climate doesn't support food production, says Thompson. Nuclear fuel is stocked months in advance, so it could be up to a year before society ran out of nuclear power. Renewables, however, would be the ultimate kingmakers. Nations with the highest renewable power generation per person would be at a huge advantage. Iceland and Norway, which both source nearly all their power from hydroelectric and geothermal sources, would be among the best equipped nations to ride out the socio-economic storm. In a cruel twist of fate, though, despite huge demand for new renewable power, deployment rates of wind and solar power would slump. The paradox of renewables is that, in their current form, they need unprecedented volumes of non-renewable mined materials. Increasing renewables, while it means fewer fossil fuels out of the ground, means large upticks in battery metals such as cobalt and nickel, says Thompson. Solar panels demand large amounts of silicon for the semiconductors in their cells. Wind turbines need rare earth metals such as neodymium for powerful magnets that generate electricity with the turn of the blade. Pressure would soon increase to redirect all metals recycling into renewables. We do recycle a fair amount already, says Jowett. Most of the base metals and a handful of other elements are already recycled at their end of life by a rate of more than 50%. Other metals that are critical to renewables, however, such as rare earths, are lost by design, he says. The way we currently use them is inherently non-recyclable. This is because technologies use tiny amounts of more and more elements, all in different ways, making it difficult to separate them to get the individual metals out. There may also be the development of new biomaterial that could mimic or replace the role of metals, John Thompson. But even if technology developed to extract these tiny quantities of rare earth metals, it's unlikely that it would meet the amount needed to vastly expand renewable energy. The metals demand is already set to exceed current production many times over, says Jowett. According to the World Bank, in a world on track to keep global warming below 2°C, the annual production of graphite, cobalt and lithium will be 5 times higher by 2050 than today's production. There is also a huge inequality in the current distribution of already extracted metals across the world. Most mined and processed metals are in use in the global north, where they have been imported, meaning populations in the global south would have less access to recyclable material. The richest 20% of the global population have access to 60 to 75% of the world's in-use metal stock per capita, according to one study, a spread even more unequal than carbon emissions inequality. A new world with no mining would have to think carefully about equal access to materials. An unprecedented rush for research could lead to breakthroughs in recycling technology and circular design, however. Products would be designed so that they last longer or so that they can be taken apart more easily, and the components returned into the system, says Thompson. This would be an about-face for the tech industry, which today produces batteries that are notoriously difficult to recycle. Research might be funneled into methods of gleaning metals without mining, such as the electrolysis of seawater and brines. There may also be the development of new biomaterial that could mimic or replace the role of metals, says Thompson. Luckily, these would probably be more recyclable. Meanwhile, energy production might need to adapt to smaller, more decentralized systems, probably using already invented tech. Last year, the environmental campaign group Seas at Risk imagined a society in 2050 that had banned mining in 2020. Bereft of a constant supply of metals, the blueprint completely overhauls the electricity grid, with a transition from large, metals-heavy solar and wind farms to decentralized and low-tech distribution. Direct hydro and wind power were other age-old technologies that made their comeback, not only for industrial applications but even for water-powered household devices, it says. Instead of large lithium-ion batteries, compressed air systems, thermal energy storage and gravity batteries become the champions of energy storage. A mine that is abandoned can have chronic pollution for hundreds if not thousands of years. Eleonore Leber, Seas at Risk, argues for the importance of rethinking energy consumption in a no-mining scenario, as well as for careful environmental policy. Without a clear vision, controversial biofuel production might make up the energy shortfall, with vast areas of land given over to forestry practices to provide wood as a source of building materials, energy and biofuels. But the work wouldn't stop there. For Leber, who researches mine closure, the closed mines themselves would be a huge source of concern. If all mining stopped, there would still be an area at least the size of Austria with degrading and in some cases dangerous levels of heavy metals. Mining is a process of entropy. We are bringing material from locked-up concentrations underground and letting them out into the world. Ensuring the cleanup and rehabilitation of these areas would be vital. Mines usually operate at depths below the water table, which need to be constantly dewatered using pumps. When a mine is abandoned, the groundwater gradually refloods underground passages and mineral seams over many months, creating acidic reservoirs of water. Above ground, meanwhile, tailings ponds and piles of low-grade or with traces of heavy metals lie in wait. All of this material is exposed to water and oxygen, says Leber. Exposing such elements to, well, the elements, wreaks havoc on ecosystems, soils and water supplies through acid leaching. A mine that is abandoned can have chronic pollution for hundreds if not thousands of years, says Leber. Cleaning up a mine consists of reducing water acidity, detoxifying the soil and treating waste before reintroducing flora and fauna to the site. It's a lengthy, expensive process and can cost billions for a single, large mine. Avoiding an environmental catastrophe, and cleaning all the world's mines at once, would cost hundreds of billions or even trillions. Global inequalities would be seen in this mining cleanup too. Moz, in his tracing of polygons across the map, has discovered that the majority of reported mines are located in the tropics, one chapter of a larger shift of mining from the global north to the global south over the last century. In a world that ended mining, these regions would have the bigger burden of the cleanup projects. With healthy soils and water re-established, though, eventually nature would return to mining sites. Wastes and tailings ponds, meanwhile, could present an opportunity to access metals. Most of a mine's desired elements are the very same pollutants present in the waste, says Leber. Mining is not going anywhere anytime soon, In fact, experts predict a new surge in metals and aggregate mining over the coming decades. With the exception of a handful of elements, such as lead and tin, the extraction of all metals is even increasing on a per capita basis, notes Zhao. Warranting more concern, perhaps, is the fact that more mining will likely create more land impacts. Mining and biodiversity researcher Laura Santer and her colleagues recently warned that mining the materials needed for renewable energy will increase the threats to biodiversity. Without careful planning, these new threats could surpass those avoided by climate change mitigation. Perhaps in time, the concept of material footprints, as an addition to carbon footprints, will catch on with governments, as they increasingly realize how much care we need to take of all our non-renewable resources.